There's certain chores you can identify, and it's even just asking therapists when you're connecting with them, are there any particular clients or types of clients or situations you really don't like? I'll give examples of what it's been for me in the past. I've never worked with like young kids, but I've done teenagers as a part of my client work before. And when I was early in marketing, there were a lot of people I would market to that didn't see teenagers, but I did. And so they would get requests for people that were in high school. I think of one person in particular that, as far as therapeutic issues, we saw pretty similar demographics, but he didn't see anyone under 18.
Yeah.
But I did. But that didn't mean he didn't get requests from people.
Hello, and welcome to the Scaling Therapy Practice. You're going to hear today some tips and tricks on how to work with other providers to help you fill your caseload, how to work with other providers and get those referrals that you're looking for. And the clip that we played at the beginning was a great example of one of the tips, where you try to find a chore that you don't mind doing or you like doing that other people might not like doing. In my house, we have chores, and my wife doesn't necessarily like vacuuming, and I don't mind it. And she finds time to do the laundry, and so we divide up those tasks. I do a lot of the dishes. She cleans some of the bathrooms, and then I do the cat boxes. So, we divide up chores. I don't mind doing those things. And that's one of the tips in this episode with finding referrals from other agencies, is find something that you do that they might not like doing, or that they have too much of, and they can definitely farm those things out to other people in the area. That's just one way to be a good neighbor and a good way to build a referral source. And then you can do the same thing for them. That's one way to get some referrals, extra referrals, and build up a network in your area. All right, on with the show.
Psych Maven is proud to support the Scaling Therapy Practice podcast. And if you are someone looking for ideas that are tailored to your own personal style on how to scale and grow your own impact and income as a mental health provider, we hope you might check out our free online assessment. If you go to stp.psychmaven.com, you can take our free personal inventory and find out what your builder type is as a helping professional. This assessment is quick and fun, and it comes with tons of customized resources with your results, so you can discover the best ways to scale that match your own personality. Find the assessment at stp.psychmaven.com. That is stp.psychmaven.com. Have fun with it.
Hello, and thank you for joining us with the Scaling Therapy Practice. This is James Marland with Dr. David Hall. Hello, David.
Hi, James.
This week, we're going to be discussing referral relationships with other therapists. But before we get into that, we're going to talk about our tool, tech, or tip of the week. I'm going to start my tool or my tech. No, it's a tip. My tip of the week is from the book Great by Choice by Jim Collins. It's a wonderful book that talks about, do companies just get lucky? Is luck just a big part of why people are success? Did they actually time things right? And he goes over the things on how businesses remove luck from the equation. And one of those steps, I think the chapter is called The 20-Mile March, something like that. And it talks about how if you were going to, and he tells a story, if you were going to start from Southern California and walk to Maine, that the best way to do that is just to walk 20 miles a day, every day, rain or shine, whether it's hot or cold, whether it's it's real easy and you think you could do 40 miles, that consistent effort, that consistent progress over time leads to a better result. And then he goes through, he's data driven. So he talks about companies that do that, rather than the person who starts out and the first day they're all excited and they go 40 miles. Then the next day it's California, so it's hot. So they like travel less. And then when it's snowy, they stay in their tent. and then they try to make up for it, and then they actually are really exhausted. And that type of up and down rhythm is no good for achieving a goal. He talks about just being consistent, being diligent, and being sustainable over time. And I just really it really spoke to me at this time where I feel behind. I just feel behind all the time. Like I have
Mm,
to like work late hours and do other things to make up for it. And it just really hit me that that's not the way to meet your goal. You're going to exhaust yourself. Just be
mm.
sustainable. So that is my tip of the week.
Mine's related
Yeah,
because it
I
is.
almost went into it,
Yeah,
but
it's the well, you talk about feeling behind and something I struggle with a lot too, James, and it's something that in recent months I've really been actively challenging myself of, what how do I live uh I mean this is sounds cliche, but how do I live more in the moment in the
sure.
in the sense of not just having this idea of putting off enjoyment and contentment to this future version of myself, but I'm gonna grind it out right now until I get there. But my tip is take a lunch break because this has been a running joke in my office in the past week or so. One of my therapists, who he's a close friend of mine, he and I became friends before he came to work for me. He's actually the only person in my practice that we were friends before became an employee, and that was an interesting thing to navigate. And that could be maybe a future episode of this idea of like, you know, personal relationships with employees and managing that. But but we navigated that well so far, and but he really he sees a lot of clients, I think. And he talks about like this idea of just scarfing down in between sessions, heating up
Mm,
some food real quick, and in the 10 minutes in between sessions just kind of gorging,
I bet there's a lot of therapists out there that are relating to this.
getting indigestion,
Yep.
and just schedule. I mean, like it could feel like a lost hour, it could feel like, but I could be seeing another client then, and
Mm,
what income am I losing and things like that. But it's exhausting to not
right.
have those breaks. So, and not, I don't mean just eat lunch in the sense of like to eat, but to give yourself just a break in the rhythm of a day, and it's worth it.
Mhm.
That's my tip.
So take your lunch break, and it does add to the end of the day. Like it does make your last couple hours of the day way more productive than if you didn't. Because I notice, like I'm guilty of not taking lunch breaks because I'm just going to grind it out or I'm going to finish this one last thing. And then I notice the last hour or two of the day, like I get half as much done as I did in the beginning of the day because I've worked to the limit of, 6, 8, 6, 7 hours. Your brain is done. If I would have taken an hour break or a 30-minute break or refueled with some food or water, I would work. I know you notice you are more sustainable and you're able to do more when you take care of yourself. I guess it's like that self-care, you
Yeah.
know, to self-care. Awesome. So we're going to get into our topic, referral relationships with other therapists or how to grow that. And my first question about that, David, is why would somebody even want to make referral relationships with other therapists? Aren't you all competitors and competing to find the clients?
That's a mindset that a lot of people have. I think it's inaccurate, but it's a mindset. Um, so I started in practice in an interesting time economically in the United States. I graduated from my master's degree program, which is when I started working as a therapist in 2006. And I was I had other jobs I was doing. I wasn't very focused at that point. I worked in a group practice, but I also was doing some administration work for an organization, and so I was involved in a few different things. And then in 2008, I ended up moving from where I was. I was living in Atlanta, Georgia, which is where I finished grad school, and ended up moving to Knoxville, Tennessee, which is where I'm from. I grew up here. My family is here and from here, and but I'd been away for college and grad school, and this was me, quote, moving home. And I got married, and my wife's a therapist, and we joined a group practice together. And 2008 was fine. It was a pretty thriving group practice. There was a strong referral base. And so at the beginning, I didn't really think a lot about the idea of drumming up my own.
Well, the company did it for you, right?
Yeah, there's quite a bit of
It was
that.
an established company that had established referral bases,
Mm,
and it was their job. Like, you didn't go home at night thinking, "Oh, where are my referrals coming from?"
yeah, it was generally their job. It was kind of this. It was encouraged for therapists to develop their own referral relationships, but at the beginning, there was enough coming in that it was okay. But 2008 was the beginning of the financial crisis. The housing crash was happening,
Housing, yeah.
and I started to really feel the effects though going into the next year, 2009. 2009 was a very lean year for me as a therapist. Referrals for the practice as a whole really dried up because two things happened. One, the practice had just done a big growth where a lot more providers had been taken
Mm.
on because the practice opened a new location. And so it was a lot more providers were having to divide up the same amount of referrals coming in generally to the practice.
This is an aside, but do you find that in your practice when you add new therapists that some of the current therapists are like, "Why are you doing this? Because I
Yes,
still need people?"
it to a degree, but because I went through that experience personally, it affects how I hire. I hire much more slowly than
Mm.
and we typically don't hire if people are still trying to build, generally. I will say,
Communicate that to your therapist? Like, "Hey, we're gonna
yeah,
take
we say
care of
that.
it." You say
Yeah,
that? Okay.
we
Yeah,
we
that's
make that an overt process, yeah.
I work with some people that grow really fast, and then, well, I worked with the assistants, and the assistants would always get these calls like, "Why aren't you giving me this person? Why are you giving it to them when I was here first?" Those types of back and forth. So,
Yeah, that was
it
and having lived that, that was one of the things I lessons I learned was
because
I
it was
didn't
really
wanna do that.
lean, right? And then
Yeah.
they grew and hired. Now all of a sudden you're like, "How am I gonna live? How am I
Yeah, it
gonna
was
live?"
well, it was a combination of I was, people couldn't file insurance with me at the time. I wasn't independently
Sure,
licensed,
sure,
and
yep.
there were other people in the practice that could file for insurance, and so that moved them further up, and there was a lot fewer referrals coming in because of the financial crisis. There were a lot more
Okay,
therapists that
yeah.
were having to be and so it was very, very lean for
It
me.
all built up. It was like this perfect storm
Yes.
of trouble.
Yeah. And so that's when I had to get focused on building my own referrals. So it goes into the thing of and there were lots of different referral sources that I learned how to develop through that season. I began reading books. There weren't a lot of books out at the time on practice building. One of the ones I got though was Casey Truffaut's Be a Wealthy Therapist. I think it's what it's called. It's either Be a Wealthy Therapist or Becoming a Wealthy Therapist. But that was one of the few. Her and Lynn Krasinski, I think is her name, were like one of the only two books available at the time in the late 2000 aughts on practice building. There are a lot more now, but and I really tried to apply some things. But one of the biggest referral sources I discovered was other therapists. Now, I went a really roundabout way, James, to your question, which is, aren't other therapists your competition?
I know, that was facetious, but
Yeah.
it was
Yes, but like, and so I'm going to answer that question now. Yes, but, and here's the big but. The the average therapist is full time. And a lot of people wonder like what full time practice looks like, and statistically, for in private practice, if you're doing outpatient work, typically it's between like 20 to 25 to 30 hours a week. That's typically full-time practice. Most people I think are hitting between the 20 and 25
Mhm.
and that's quote full-time
Client
private work.
hours, right?
Client
Client
hours, yeah, yeah.
client hours.
Not necessarily hours at the office, but that many client hours a week.
Yeah.
And let's say half of your clients you see weekly and then half are biweekly or some combination. So that means that a full caseload is going to be somewhere around between 40 and 45 active cases of varying degrees of frequency. That's what a full caseload is for a therapist. The average primary care physician in the United States has an active patient load of about 1,500 people.
The
I
act
mean,
1,500.
Yeah. And you think about that because, how often does the average person see their doctor? And even if you're real on top of it, you do a physical every year, you go in, like, if you go in a few times a year, that's pretty frequent for a lot of people to see their
Yeah, that's
primary care
true. That's true.
physician. And so you spread it out over the course of a year, it's 1,500 is, I mean, I can't remember where I picked up that number initially, give or take. So you look at that like here's why I bring up that number. The difference between like if 10 patients quit a primary care physician, they may not notice.
Right, right, for sure. I mean,
If
they could quit 3 months before they even tell you they quit.
Yes, they're not gonna notice necessarily because it goes to, from 1,500 to 1,490,
Yeah,
and new ones will come in and it's fine. But if you've got an active caseload of 40 and 10 people quit, that's a quarter of your caseload.
yeah,
That's a lot.
yeah,
But the same sort of way as growing it, the difference between empty and full for a therapist isn't that much and isn't that
right,
long. So the reason it's important to market, I think, to other therapists is because it's only competition if that therapist is still trying to get new clients or still has open spaces or still has, but as soon as that therapist is full, they need you.
right.
Um, I don't like saying I can't help somebody. When someone calls
Mhm.
me to become a client of mine and I don't have space to accommodate them, I want options.
Yeah,
And so an empty therapist may be competition, but the difference between empty and full is really small,
mhm.
compared to other healthcare providers for therapy. And realizing that even if this therapist is needing more clients in this moment, there's going to be another time where they don't, and where they're going to need overflow. They're going to need to be able to send people, and that's why therapists are good to market to.
So how did you discover this? Like, how did you know it was a good idea to start working on your referral list?
Well, I knew it was a good idea because I needed more clients, and that was, and then I just tried what were the things that worked, and part of it for me initially was a big. It was a lot like throwing spaghetti against the wall. I didn't know what was going to stick. I just tried a lot of things. There were things I tried in marketing and certain referral relationships I looked to focus on that weren't as fruitful. And what I
So
discovered in trial and error was therapists were.
so what were, some of the barriers then? You were talking like you tried a bunch of things. Were there any barriers to creating this list?
Um, I mean, for different referral partners, yes, but that feels like a different episode. And talking specifically about for therapists, yeah, there were. For one, therapists are horrible at responding to emails and phone calls, particularly for non-clients, but even for clients.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I had to learn was not to take it personal when people didn't get back to me.
Mhm.
Uh, that I just would stay on top. If there's somebody I wanted to connect with, I was just persistent.
Mhm.
And in realizing that you had to be that just because I emailed somebody didn't mean they were gonna email me back. And people were busy and I experience this now. I've there's a new treatment facility that's opened up in my community, and there's their head of referral development, business development has been trying to get with me since before, uh, for a few months now. And she had originally reached out to me, and I got back to her and kinda playing phone tag, but they had emailed me in this last week, like, twice, and I hadn't responded. And I feel bad a little bit, but I'm also very busy, and they're not, but
Mm.
part of it is they're not high on my list, like, I don't really need them. I'm very sympathetic because I've been in that position before as having to drum up business for a new treatment, uh, facility, and I know this is their job.
When I was running the virtual assistant company, pretty successful, I would get 3, 4 requests for my time a week or more, just like partner with this, do this. I got fatigued. Like it wasn't that I didn't value them or what they were doing or what they were trying to do. I already had like 6 of these similar things in the fire already, and I could not I could not get one more. Like I couldn't do one more. Like I couldn't even read the email. I couldn't even
I
think about it.
I felt that, and for this case I'm talking about, like, I responded to them, and this was on Monday, and they said, "Hey, love to come in," and I'm like, "I don't really need to meet them. have their information online. I know, like, I know what they're trying to do, and that's okay." I know part of it is there's a certain amount of sympathy, but I gave them a date 2 weeks from when they requested. I looked at my calendar. I'm like, "Hey, if you wanna come by this hour," but I didn't give them choices. I said, "I've got this time on this day at my office," and they agreed, and great. But anyway, but I try to remember part of it is I try to remember myself when I needed to build those referral
Yeah.
relationships, and so I wanna be kind and responsive when I can be, but be persistent. That was a barrier. Um, and yeah, just realizing that, uh, sometimes those therapists may be a little wary because they may be thinking, "Well, you're competition. Why would I wanna connect with you?" So
Well, is the mindset, I might get this wrong, but like the closed, like you grasp everything closed and like nothing can get in, or like the open hand type of example where if you live with that open hand mindset, it's easier to develop those relationships. Is that sort of
it is, and
what might
and
help?
just certain therapists again, therapists are just hard personalities to crack sometimes. People are busy, people, um, it's hard for people to make time, but stay persistent in it, but and if they see you as competition, here's how I encourage people to have this conversation. So let's say you're reaching out to somebody. Uh, if it's an email, it's a phone call, here's the general script I
Mhm.
offer to people, which is the key is not to make it about, "I need something from you."
Right.
Make it about, "I wanna develop a relationship with you that I wanna be beneficial for you and me." But start with how it's gonna benefit them. So a typical way that I will coach people to say it is, if it's me, I would say, "Hey, my name's David Hall. I'm a therapist in your area. It looks like I found you online. It looks like that we see a pretty similar demographic of client. And I'd love to take you out for coffee because I'm wanting to develop new referral relationships for when I need to send
Mhm.
people I can't accommodate out and to see how I might be a fit for you and help you in your practice." But I always start with, "How can I benefit them?" And I
Right.
don't wanna be disingenuous about it because it is true, like, if this person does see a similar client demographic to what I see, at some point, I'll be full, and I'll need to know about them.
You need to help people when they get reach to you, even if they
Mhm.
can't see you. You need to
Yeah,
be able to like get them the next change. What's the
yeah.
next step?
Now, in the moment where I'm making that phone call, I may be have a completely empty schedule, and I don't have these I'm not gonna be sending clients away. But it's
Mhm.
not disingenuous because that's just the reality of this moment. What other moments are going to look like could be different, and I wanna develop the relationship for that sake. So that's how I encourage people to start the conversation. Present yourself as a resource when you meet with them. I have some
What if
other tips.
what if they say no or they ignore you? Like when do you re-engage? Like or when are good times to re-engage? Like maybe the beginning of a school year, the beginning of a year. Like what are the
Well,
times
if
to
they say no, um, you judge that no, what kind of no that is. If it's no, unkind, unfriendly sort of way, then, you know, move on. But it could just be, "Well, I don't have time right now." Then
right?
it's like, "Well, is there a time in the future where it'd be good for me to check back in?"
Mhm.
Uh, ask the follow-up, ask for kind of the opportunity. If they just ignore you, um, there's a therapists are busy and they're just generally not good at responding to stuff. I like to follow something called Hanlon's razor for this. Hanlon's
Okay.
razor states, "Never ascribe to malice what can be adequately ascribed to ignorance or neglect."
Mhm.
So, in layman's terms, what that means is don't assume that they don't like you. Assume that they're just ignorant of the situation or they're just not attending to it. Like being ignored it's easy to assume when you're the person being ignored that they see your email and they're like, I don't want to help this person, or I don't want to talk to this person. Don't assume that. Assume that it's just that they're just not on top of it. That's
Does
a
that sound like the fundamental attribution error? Have you heard of that? Am I
yes. It's similar. It plays in this the same.
I would always tell people, like, my example was, if somebody cuts you off in traffic, that doesn't mean that they meant to cut you off in traffic and they hate you and like they're the biggest jerk in the world. Like you assume what they're thinking or doing, but maybe they're late for work or their kid's sick or they just
Yeah,
didn't even see the ignorant thing. They didn't even see you, but then we assume that and we make no excuses for them.
yeah,
But then when we do the very same thing, we're like, "Oh, I was late," or "I had to make the light," or "I'm not a
yeah.
bad person. I did this." What was yours called again? The
Hanlon's razor.
Hanlon's razor. Okay.
Yeah, it's helpful, and it's helped me overcome certain barriers because there's certain key relationships I had in business and otherwise that they just didn't respond,
Mm,
and it's because they're kind of scattered as individuals, and I just had to stay on it. There's one key relationship I have, which is funny. It's with my friend Bill O'Hanlon,
mhm.
and so I learned about the razor when I was failing to get a response for him. This was years ago, and because he had told me to reach out to him about something, and he wasn't getting back with me, and it's something I really wanted to do, and he wasn't responding. And then I came across Hanlon's razor in dealing with my frustration with O'Hanlon. And so I said to myself, I go, I'm going to reach out consistently until
Mm.
he tells me to F off,
Yeah, buzz off, man.
but or respond.
Yeah,
And I did. And it took me 6 months, but he
but it was
finally
worth it. It's a good relationship.
you know,
Like,
it's a hugely and like and the truth was that attribution that I chose to make was important because he wasn't
mhm,
me. Part of it was is his life was a whirlwind at that point. It wasn't,
mhm.
and I wasn't what I was trying to connect with wasn't a huge priority for him. And at that moment, and he would say that like he would because he was busy with other things. And when I finally was able to engage with him, is when his life slowed down and he had the capacity to engage with it.
I remember reading somewhere, it was probably a book on conflict, where when we don't know what's going on, we often assume the worst. Like it
Yeah,
just feel like the knowledge gap is filled in with, they don't, the bad stuff. They don't care. They're mean people. They don't like. And if, can you imagine in a relationship if you filled in all the stuff you don't know about what they're thinking with the bad things,
yeah.
how it's going to impact your behavior. So yeah, it's really important what you're talking about, to fill in what you don't know with not the negative assumptions that you don't even know if they're true.
Yeah. So persistence is the first
Okay.
key. Making it, be forward in how you can be a benefit to them. Be genuine in it. Be really thinking about like, is this and don't say that I'm going to refer to you if you can't ever imagine referring to this person.
Right.
But so don't be dishonest, but think about like if it's just like gimme, what can you do for me? That's not a very savory thing for people in engaging in a new
Right.
relationship. Here's another tip. If you're gonna meet with people, do breakfast. Here's why. Why would you guess
Yeah.
breakfast,
Why
James?
breakfast?
What would you guess, James? There are
Uh,
2 key reasons. I'll give you so see if you can get one.
oh dear. Well, most diners that I go to serve really good breakfast. It's the
That's good rea if you have a good if breakfast is gonna be a pleasant meal, that's a good one. So that's
whenever I go out with people for like groups and things, it's always breakfast, but I haven't really figured out why. I think it's a little casual. It's
that's good. Those are though you're doing extra reasons. Good breakfast,
all
casual.
right. I'm drawing I mean,
I get this from a
it's
book I read about
it's
marketing a long time
cheap.
ago. Yes, that's one of it is. It's cheap.
Oh really? Okay.
If you're going to breakfast is usually the least expensive meal,
Okay.
and you wanna pay. If you're going to develop a
No, that
marketing
makes sense.
relationship, you wanna pay for it. But breakfast is not going to be it's gonna be cheaper than lunch and dinner
Mhm.
in almost any place. Even if you go to a place that has an expensive breakfast, if that place also serves lunch and dinner, it will be more expensive for those other meals.
Yeah.
But you're not necessarily going to have to deal with the awkwardness of someone ordering lobster for breakfast necessarily. It's typically where I am in the South, like it's a lot of, Waffle House is a big spot or things like, but
Yeah.
breakfast is pretty inexpensive. So particularly if you're, trying to, you're not looking to spend a lot of money, breakfast is a good reason. It's the least expensive meal and you want to pay. That's one reason. The other reason is you're the first thing they begin thinking about in that day.
Okay.
And so that gives them, if you've presented yourself as an opportunity for them as a referral relationship, they have the whole day in front of them to think about how you can play into that. And let's say for some reason, like you were meeting them for like coffee after work and something else. They might start thinking about you, but their workday's already done. They're going to go and disengage from work thinking. They're going to go to sleep at some point. They're going to be, and then the day starts over and you may be lost in that shuffle. So it gives you the opportunity to be in somebody's mind at the big early in the day, and you can
When it's
pay for
not full of
yeah,
other things. Yeah.
yeah.
That makes
So that
sense.
would be that's one tip. Another tip. This is one. If you're looking to connect with other people, other providers, identify what you might have as a chore of choice.
What do you mean by that?
Something that you don't mind doing that other people often do mind doing. It doesn't have to be something you love that much, but something you don't mind. So one of my jobs when I was younger, James, was a buddy of mine and we had a janitorial service when I was like 18, 19. We used to clean offices. And we would divide and conquer. And there were certain things like he didn't mind doing toilets or windows, and I really disliked both. Windows I found really, but I didn't mind vacuuming. And
Yeah.
he was so bored with vacuuming, and so we would always do one or the other. Like I would always do the vacuuming for the most part because I didn't mind vacuuming as much as he minded vacuuming, and he would do the windows because he didn't mind doing windows. That was his choice. So it wasn't that he loved windows necessarily, but he didn't mind it. So
Yeah.
as a
So how does
therapist,
that help you in this relationship?
there's certain chores you can identify, and it's even just asking therapists when you're connecting with them, are there any particular clients or types of clients or situations you really don't like? I'll give examples of what it's been for me in the past. I've never worked with like young kids, but I've done teenagers as a part of my client work before. And when I was early in marketing, there were a lot of people I would market to that didn't see teenagers, but I did.
Mm.
And so they would get requests for people that were in high school. I think of one person in particular that, as far as therapeutic issues, we saw pretty similar demographics, but he didn't see anyone under 18,
Yeah.
but I did. But that didn't mean he didn't get requests from people
So
who
do
were
you
looking.
ask them for this? Do you say,
Yeah,
hey,
I'll
will you
say
come right
like,
out and say,
yeah.
I like these are, yeah. How would you approach that?
I mean, sometimes it would be, there's certain things that are more common as chores for therapists. Like another one for me is I developed a niche with narcissistic leaning men,
Mm-hmm.
that I do pretty well therapeutically with them. And there are a lot of therapists that are very overt that like, I do not enjoy narcissistic leaning males.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was aware that was a common chore for a lot of people. And it was one that I didn't mind. So when I was forward and talking about it, like, oh, I've got plenty of those that I can send you.
Okay.
But you think about like, what is something that you like or like well enough that's rarer, or even ask is you're meeting somebody is like, is there anything you particularly don't like seeing? And they may list 4 or 5 things. And you may, for 4 of those things, you may not want to see them either, but there may be one thing.
Right. And there's some of the therapists I've worked with, they will take a few of those, but once they get to a certain level,
Yeah.
even if they're not full, they're like, I cannot take one more of this type of person. They're draining me. What can I do with them? Oh, David sees this person. Maybe I'll refer it
Yeah.
to him.
Yeah. And so it's not just, like you said, James, it could be they're not even full, but
Right.
they're topped off on that. For me, of a chore, like I have a pretty low limit on uh infidelity work with couples,
Mm-hmm.
infidelity recovery. That's something I find very taxing. I'll do some of it, but I have a pretty low limit. But I have therapist friends of mine that is their bread and butter. That's what they do. And so for you, it could be that you see an age range, or you see couples, and you're talking to a lot of individual therapists, or you see certain types of individuals and you're talking to a lot of couples therapists, or take your
Mhm.
pick. And so it's figuring out what is it something that you offer that solves a problem for them. But you always want to be approaching other therapists as a problem solver for them. And if you do that, there's a quid pro quo that kind of gets inferred in that if you're willing to help them, they're more willing to help you. And I
Yeah,
don't mean this in an insincere, manipulative sort of way, but it's really hard to develop meaningful referral relationships if you lead in with how can you help me?
yeah. Well, people like to work with generous people. Like,
Yes.
just it's just easier to work with people who are generous and add value. And if you can figure out where can you be generous and how can you add value, it's going to be easier to work with you than somebody who comes and says, give me your referrals.
Yeah. So be persistent, be generous, have a chore of choice. Here's my last bit
Okay.
in building relationships with therapists. Um, be consistent. And in a recent episode that James and I recorded, it may come out before or after this. James was talking about this idea of uh, or was it the beginning of this episode where you talked about
The 20-mile march. It was actually this episode.
okay, this episode,
I
yeah.
know things run together.
They run together. So anyway, earlier in this episode, James was talking about the consistency. Referral relationships work like this. Here's often what can happen for successful referral relationships. Let's say James is another therapist in my community, and I've been marketing to James, and James, and I noticed, some of it is in when you initially establish a relationship with somebody, oftentimes referrals do not come right away. Whatever marketing you do is for 3 to 6 weeks in the future for the most part. It's rare to see fruit of that endeavor immediately. Sometimes it happens, but it's not fair to expect it.
Mm.
It often takes time for that thing to gestate. That you'll do something, you'll make a connection with somebody, you'll do an event, whatever it is, and you'll see the fruit of that later. But let's say I take James out for breakfast in one of these delicious diners, and James, appreciates that I'm willing to see teenagers because he doesn't like seeing teenagers, or, narcissistic leaning individuals or whatever. And he sends me plenty of those. And I get pretty consistent referrals from James for the next few months. And then it kind of trickles off. It's easy for me to then think of oh, James doesn't have any more people for me, or maybe James doesn't like me anymore. He's not. And the truth is, it just becomes an out of sight, out of mind thing for people.
Yeah.
And oftentimes where people think that they need a market is I need to find a whole new set of people to connect with. And it's usually much more fruitful to go back and reconnect with people you've already connected with. And so I'll do something. For me, historically, what it's been is I choose to assume that they just haven't thought about me, that they probably still
Mhm.
have clients in their world that they would think to refer to me. They just haven't thought of me in a while. And because I haven't seen them or I haven't been on their radar. But it could be something as simple as sending a text message if James and I have that sort of connection relationship. Be like, hey James, I was just thinking about you. I hope practice is going well for you. If there's anything that I can offer that would be helpful for you in this season, let me know. Just wanted to let you know. I've had some I've had some clients that have recently wrapped up work, and I've got some openings if you
Mhm.
have anybody that could be a good fit. Love to catch up with you sometime for us to do breakfast again soon.
Mhm.
Something like that. Something that's typically my sort of message. And James and I may get breakfast. He may be like, "Oh, I really like to go back out to breakfast," or something like that. But at the very least, I've put myself back on his mind, and he's more likely to be like, "Oh yeah, I forgot, David's an option." I do this constantly. Well, I'll remember therapists, and it's not that
Mm.
I'm
Mhm.
I have any negative thoughts or feelings about them. It's just there's a lot of things I carry around in my head. I'll just not actively think about people. one of my a therapist that I'm inconsistent referring to, she's a great provider in my community, but what it is she and I used to go to church together, and she and her
Oh,
husband
yeah.
ended up going to they're part of a different church community now, and I don't see her as frequently,
Mm-hmm.
and because of that, I don't think about her.
Yep.
But something came up on social media recently, and I thought I need to remember, like, in but whereas she was on kind of the tip of my brain for
Mm-hmm.
referrals for certain sorts of clients at a different season, she's not as much anymore, but it's not because of any ill will or any lack of belief in her ability. It's just my life doesn't bring her up as much.
Great. So as we start winding down, what are some, if we haven't gone over this yet, what are some tips to get started? Like you're just starting, you're like a
Yeah, that's a good
little
question.
fearful. What are some tips to get started?
Um, here's what I recommend to people. So have a client in mind that you're trying to connect with. What do you feel is your sort of client?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes people will be too broad, but there's a class I have, and there's a whole exercise I take people through of like thinking through who's your target client. But have somebody identified and go online as that sort of client. So let's say your target client is women in their mid-20s dealing with anxiety about relationships and career. Let's say that's your target.
Mm-hmm.
So pretend like you're an individual that fits in those demographics. And how would you go about finding a therapist? So, typically for someone in that age range, they're gonna find a therapist by going online. And they're gonna do a search, like an internet search on Google, or they're gonna be versus,
Yeah.
in different generations, most of these generations have aged out, but when I first started teaching marketing, of a certain age range, someone would go to a phone book. That's not what most people do anymore, but there was
Probably
a
not
generation where that
anymore.
would be what they would do. And so think about what's this demographic going to do and who comes up. And so most of the time, what's going to come up is online directories. And so Psychology Today being the biggest, but there are other ones like Good Therapy and Monarch and Therapy Den, and there are
Mm-hmm.
other like directories that come up. And search those directories for the sorts of therapists that see the sort of client you're thinking about, and see who comes up, and make a list of therapists in your community. That's one way to start. Another way is just think of who you know. Like sometimes it's much easier to make a connection with somebody who's a warm contact. So think of people you went to grad school with. Think of people that even just starting with coworkers. If you're in a co-op or a group therapy practice, or just how are you connecting with people you share office space with or in close proximity to?
Couple episodes ago, I think we talked about uh, c- uh, re affiliation, like people in your
Yeah,
area that you meet with, groups and stuff. Like
yeah,
who's
like yeah.
there?
Who's in your community that's leading? Where's the opportunity to meet new therapists? And as you meet people,
Yeah.
and it's a positive relationship, ask, like, who else? I mean, a common question would be, I'll be like, James, I've really appreciated, the referrals you've sent me. Um, who else do you think I should connect with that I may not be thinking about that also sees people like this? Or,
You track who sends you referrals?
it's good if you can, it's good to. A lot of EHRs, like therapy notes and simple practice, will let you in a client file uh, highlight where the client came from. And it can be extra work, but particularly if you're in that
Does it
phase.
collate the data and tell you like you got 10 referrals from
I
'cause
don't know. And
when I was working
honestly,
with the
James,
assistants, some practices had a call log and you could track who referred you, and uh if you accepted them or didn't accept them, because often if they're sending people you can't accept, all you have to do is say, thank you so much for the referrals.
mhm,
I'm looking for this type of client. Do you have anybody that fits that
yeah,
range? Or if they're sending you a lot of people, thank you cards, breakfast, smoothing the relationship goes a long way to like
Keep
let
it
them
going.
know.
No,
Yeah,
absolutely.
keep it
Think
going.
about if you're getting a lot of work from people, send them a Starbucks card or find out what they like, find out what the
Yeah,
sorts of things they're into. And like, it's like you said, James, generosity, people want to respond to
people
that.
want to work with those people. Yeah.
And so to answer your I've not actually managed that in any AHRs I've worked in, so I don't know if it
Okay.
tabulates it. Historically, in the past for me, I did keep a spreadsheet. I would keep an
Okay.
Excel spreadsheet where I would put in, and I would create a pie chart at any
Yep.
given point where, like, looking at my referral sources, and it was something I did once a quarter, and I'm far less disciplined about that right now. But historically, that's something I did. And so there are different ways that you can come up to track it that I encourage you to track it
So,
because
so when you're
you
getting
want to know.
started, tracking it is probably a great idea.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Other things, any other startup tips?
I mean, we'll probably do other episodes, I imagine, James, where we'll talk about like other referral sources. But
Sure.
therapist is one of the ones I think is most overlooked. People assume it's competition, so they don't even
Right.
start there. But really, they're people that are tuned in to an audience is looking for the exact same service that you offer. And any potential and you want it for your own referral network in the future, because you wanna have the mindset that, like, one day I will be full, and I'll need other people to send people to.
Great.
And how do I have that? And, and then it becomes in this idea in the future when they're full and I'm not, then but really look at it as a reciprocal relationship. If it's just a parasitic relationship versus a symbiotic one, I would really discourage that attitude. That comes
Mhm.
across. It's really hard to really but if it's just,
You're
"I
you're
need
working
something
you're
from you."
working with therapists who can read people.
Yeah,
They're gonna find out. Like,
and don't fake it. Don't have this
yeah,
idea like, "I need to come across as generous and mutually beneficial, but I just want from you."
yeah,
Like, really
really
set
generous.
the mindset
Yeah.
of, like, "How do I make this reciprocal and mutually
Mhm.
beneficial?"
Great. So, if there's one thing you want somebody to take away from this episode, I'll start. Uh, my one of my favorite motivational speakers, I guess, is Zig Ziglar. I've
Mhm.
listened to a bunch of his books, and one of his big phrases is that if you help enough people get what they want, you get what you want. Or he might say it a little bit differently than that, but it's you all make it to the top together. Like
Mhm.
you help people, they help you. It's the generosity thing. And that's sort of how I live my philosophy is, I'm just trying to give people what I want. Like I want help, I'm gonna give help and it comes back to you. So that's my one thing. Be generous. What
I would
do you
agree.
have a one thing?
Have a chore of choice. Decide
Mm.
what you are okay doing. If you wanna market to other therapists, decide something you're okay doing that other people or at least some other people don't. Let that be one of the angles. I don't know if I really like that as my one thing, but I'm gonna leave it as that because there are other things that are good. But, that's my one thing.
No,
So,
that's good. Well,
yeah.
it's a starting point. Like some people wouldn't even know how to approach the conversation. So this is like a very good that one thing of like have one thing that you want to be able to offer, and that's where you start your generosity. Like you're offering to take this chore off from somebody. It's really good.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks for joining me. This is James with Dr. David Hall. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Later, y'all.
Thanks for watching or listening to the show. If you do want to see us and watch us, we have a YouTube channel, and I'll put that in the show notes. This episode really highlighted that it's a community of people trying to help other people get the supports they need. Yes, it can feel like competition, but in the end, if you want to help the consumer and the client, when you get full, you're going to need a network of resources to refer people to. And the same thing goes for the other therapists in your area. They will need somebody to send people to. So it benefits everyone to connect with each other and distribute the work. Eventually, they're going to get full and then they will need you. When building a referral network, it's good to focus on what you can do to help other people. What chore can you take off their plate? what can you do for them that will be genuine and build a trusting relationship with them. Don't go to them first and say, hey, I need your clients. See if you can take something off their plate or help them in some way. And then when they're full and it's time for them to refer people, you'll be top of mind. This was a great episode on building referral network. I hope those help. If you found one of the tips particularly helpful, leave a comment in Apple reviews, or you can email me, james@coursecreationstudio.com. I want to thank David for being an awesome guest host and giving us some of his knowledge. If you like the show, please rate and review it, share it with your friends. It helps us reach a larger audience. Thanks again for listening to the Scaling Therapy Practice. The opinions expressed of the hosts and guests are for education and information purposes only. It's also not intended for therapeutic advice or therapy session. If you need an accountant or somebody to do your taxes or a therapist, we highly recommend you find somebody who specializes in those areas that you can talk with. Scaling Therapy Practice is part of the SciCraft network. And now time for the disclaimer. The opinions expressed on the Scaling Therapy Practice is of their hosts, and it is not intended for... Oh, I'm getting a phone call. The opinions expressed by the hosts and guests of the Scaling Therapy Practice is not meant for personal advice. It is the opinions expressed by the hosts and guests of the Scaling Therapy Practice are meant for education and entertainment purposes only. We are not lawyers or tax people. What are those called? Accountants. We are a therapist and a Thanks again for listening to the Scaling Therapy Practice. The hosts expressed by the guests, and thank you for listening to the Scaling Therapy Practice. Thanks for listening to the Scaling Therapy Practice. The opinions expressed by the host and guests are of theirs alone, and it's not intended for